So we need to get back on track. If you saw the announcements, we won't do a test for the 4 weeks. We'll just do the essay. So I sent that out to you. Again, most of that stuff was covered in my lecture. Some of it's in the book, and you can also research for yourself. Again, I'm not looking for you to write as if you have your PhD. So don't try to Google something that sounds impressive, and copy and paste it. I want to know what you can research and put in your own words, okay? So if you find something, you have an argument, you put it in your own words, you defend it, I'd rather see you do that than plagiarize something. So take what you have in terms of what I've discussed, what you've read, hopefully, and what you can find on Google, and write the essay accordingly. Okay.
What's the essay over?
It is over.
Is it in the announcements?
Yes.
Okay,
the one basically in week 4. If you look in week 4, all there is an assignment. It's the essay assignment.
Okay.
It's due by next Monday. So you have all week to write it in the weekend. And basically is give me your reason for the rapid expansion of Islam. Why do you think it expanded? Why was it so successful? We covered a lot of that in last week or 2 weeks ago. But again, you don't have to regurgitate what I said. You take in what I said. I didn't say it was the gospel. It's just some reasoning behind it. Do your own research and put your own things. I ask you to cite them. I'm not looking for APA. This is not a dissertation class. I just want to be able to find it. So if you find a good website that you think is a good source and you want to reference it, give me the web address. Simple as that at the end of it. So I can go find it, look at it, read it for myself. I'm not big on periods, commas, things like that in citation. Now, I am big on that when it comes to you writing a good sentence. You're a college student, so you should be able to write a good sentence. All right? So I would take off if, there's a bunch of misspelled words. Spell check. Okay? And if you can't put together a sentence, that's a problem. But as long as you put together a good argument and you put some facts in there, it's not because my Aunt Susie told me so, but some good facts that you find and you extrapolate your reasons for it. That's all I'm looking for.
Do you want it to be like a certain length, or you just?
It's in that thing. It's minimum 1.5 pages, maximum 3 pages. So you're not writing a dissertation, but I also don't want a paragraph. Okay. All right. So tonight we are going to talk about the Crusades, one of the most famous periods in Christendom and in the Middle East, and some of the reasons and impacts of the Crusades, leading all the way up until the present day. So when you look at Blackboard, you'll see that week 4 only has the essay in it because I took things and shifted them down. We will still do a midterm, but we will not do a test, the 4 weeks test. This is the 4 weeks test. That essay is the 4 weeks test. Other than that, the class should remain the same. The test will be online. Okay, so when we come in for the test week, which is about week 8, we'll just have a regular class like we're having tonight because you will have taken the midterm already through Blackboard. So I'm building that right now because I have some virtual students. I post this video after class, and so they're following on that way. So I didn't want to give you a paper pencil test because they can't be here for that. So we'll just do it through Blackboard. Okay, so when I get it posted, completed, and everything, I'll let you know. All right. So the Crusades. This is the period before the Crusades, between 636 AD up to 1072 AD. There is what's left of the Roman Empire, which is now the Byzantine Empire. Okay. You have the Battle of Yarmouk, which is the Byzantine Empire, was defeated by the Umayyadan dynasty. We talked about the Umayyads 2 weeks ago, not last week. This was a battle in which the Byzantine Empire lost control of Palestine, Palestine being the Holy Land. So this was the first time that the non-Christian Roman / Byzantine Empire did not control the Holy Land. Okay, so it's no longer in their control. Between the period of 636 AD and 1072, the Byzantine Empire is contracting. It is losing power and getting weaker and weaker and weaker. But this is a significant moment in Christendom because it is the first time that the land in which Jesus of Nazareth, Jesus the Christ, to the Christian church, was no longer in Christendom's control. But I want to make known that during this time, even though it was under Muslim control, tolerance, trade, and political stability lasted until 1072. So it was not that they lost the Holy Land and, the terrible Muslims were killing the Christians and doing horrible things. Actually, it was a very stable and tolerant time frame for the Holy Land in terms of being under Muslim control. So the argument of we need to save them from the horrible, Muslims didn't really hold water at this point in time, and they really weren't being treated unfairly. This is, again, as we talked 2 weeks ago, they were treated as people of the book. They were treated as kind of a stepbrother, if you might say, of religions, because there was a similar background, and so there really was not that much of a problem. But the Fatimid Caliph of Egypt lost control of Palestine in 1072 to the Great Seljuk Empire. The Great Seljuks controlled much of the Anatolian Peninsula, which is modern-day Greek. This loss of control did create some tension in the area, and then after that, you have a civil war within the Great Seljuk Empire that caused people in the Holy Land to be impacted. So it wasn't a direct attack on Christendom or Jews or the Holy Land. It was similar to the current situation in Syria, that people are in a civil war, and so anyone who lives there is being impacted. Okay? So what we have post-Umayyads and Abbasians, okay, those two great empires of the Muslim world. And if you read, I did not assign it, but if you would read, for tonight you should have read 10 and 11, 12. So you read before that, there's the kind of great disintegration of the great empires of Islam. When they broke apart into different subgroups or fiefdom or kingdoms. These kingdoms were still Islamic in nature, but you had the groups that were over in the Iberian Peninsula, which was Spain, and then you have North Africa, more so the Moroccans and the one group in that area, and then you have the fiefdom or the Caliphate of Egypt, which spans most of northern Africa, and then you had the Seljuks. So it became very regional. Okay, you had this great Islamic empire, two of them, the Umayyads and the Abbasians. Once those fall apart, it turns into more regional sultans. How many of you have seen Aladdin? Okay, that idea. There was a sultan of kind of each area, or a caliph, a person in charge of each area. But there was not the great empire that had span across North Africa and was really pushing on the Byzantine Empire. But when it turned into more of a regional effect, you had some instabilities and warring factions, and so this created an opportunity. Okay, so with the death of Malik Shah I, the Great Seljuk Empire, it broke into a civil war. This gave the Byzantine Empire the idea to push back on the Seljuk Turks to say, hey, we look to our right and we see this empire is in civil war. Why don't we ask Rome, which had changed? A little back history. By 636 AD to 1072 AD, what does Europe look like? Does anybody know when Rome fell? When was Rome conquered? Okay, so you all have cell phones, right? Look it up. So I love about Google. You no longer have to have blank stares. You can just look it up. So when was the last time Rome was sacked?
It says in 476 CE.
Okay, so that's the same thing as AD. So the Common Era. So basically, in the 4th century, Rome is obliterated. There's no more Rome. Okay? So by the 1072 AD, Europe is in what period? What's it called?
Dark Ages.
There you go. The Dark Ages. Dark Ages meaning what? Meaning there just wasn't any light? Is that what I mean?
Guess it just wasn't happy.
No, it wasn't. It was not a very happy place. The Dark Ages basically is what we call the post-classical period. It's pre-Renaissance. We all know what the Renaissance is. What's the Renaissance? The rebirth. Shakespeare. The rebirth of what? Sorry? Literature. What else? There's one area. Intellectual, yes. I mean, basically study, science, literature, history, mathematics. Okay? We get to the Renaissance, and that is an explosion of thought. It's when man becomes, again, aware that it can think, and it can create, and it should. Okay? And it should question. Okay, well, the Hellenistic period, okay, during the Greeks and the Romans is a great time of thinking and expansion and innovation. But then when Rome falls, Europe goes into what's called the Dark Ages. Dark Ages literally means back to before organized civilization and growth as human beings. Okay? It is a period in time where in Europe, you probably would be in charge. Why? Compared to the three of us. I'll stand up for a second.
Oh.
Okay, so why would you be in charge?
I'm bigger.
You're bigger and stronger, okay? And I don't make that in jest. Truly, it was about who had the most power, whether it was physical strength or maybe I have enough money that I have some goons that could take you out. But it was a very non-civilized version of Europe, okay? Not the Europe that we understand is a very whoever has the strength, the power is in charge, right? So Europe at this time, leading up to this time, is controlled by the church, because they're the only people that can read, okay? The nobility, because they're the only people with any kind of wealth, and kings who get their divine right from the church and from God, and I'm in power because God says so, but really it's I'm in power because my dad was in power because he was a chieftain or something, and so I've now created this kingdom, and so because I have power, people follow me because the normal people, the regular people, the peasants say, well, I don't have any power and he has lots of power, so he must be picked by God. Okay? So that's kind of the era that Europe is in. Now, that's not the case in the Middle East. In the Middle East, you have the growth of the sciences, you have math, you have trade. So as Europe falls into the Middle Ages and the Dark Ages, okay, you have a great expansion of thought and understanding and communication in the Muslim world. But then the Muslim world ends up in a civil war because of breaking apart into these little areas. So the once great Byzantine Empire, what's left of the Roman Empire, says, you know what? This is a good opportunity maybe to create another Roman Empire, to gain control again. They see all these great things that are happening over there. They're still learning this stuff, but they want power again. They want to be able to control their own destiny, and they think, you know what? We can call on Rome, because the Romans, not the Romans, but the Church of Rome has now become the Holy Roman Empire, and they have these barbaric kings that will kind of do whatever the church says as long as they say it's for Christ. Okay? And what better idea than to go free the Holy Land? Okay? So they're trying to be opportunistic here to say the Muslim world is in disarray and maybe we can get some of our land back. The Civil War disrupts the pilgrimage to Jerusalem for Christians. And that is kind of the catalyst that the Byzantine Empire and Pope Urban II uses to say, hey, let's go over there and kind of take things back over for Christ. So, in 1071, Muslim I say that. They won an important battle. This battle, okay, was in Mazarin. It's right here on the edge of the empire, but in winning this, they gained control, okay, of most of the Anatolian peninsula, okay. The Byzantine factions then decide to turn to each other, and they're fighting again. I was talking about the Seljuks. They are fighting each other for the reign of Anatolia. So the Byzantine Empire under Alexis is his name. The emperor of the Byzantine Empire calls on Rome to Pope Urban and says, "Hey, come help us against the Muslims." So prior to this is kind of the world. You have the Byzantine Empire. The Seljuks take over much of the Anatolian peninsula, and so the Byzantine Empire under Alexis calls upon Rome. The Roman Empire is no more. This is not really the Roman Empire controlled by Rome. It's more so Rome, the church, and you have the Holy Roman Empire, which is up here, Charlemagne and the Frankish kings. What you'll notice is that every time there's a crusade over here, the Middle Eastern people call these Europeans Franks. Doesn't matter if it's English speaking, you hear about Richard the Lionheart coming over in the Crusades, called him a Frank. Okay, why? Because in the first big crusade, it's kind of the big push is out of France, and most of the Crusaders are French, and so it's kind of like someone saying, "Well, you're all Americans." If you're someone who goes over to Europe and well, you're all American. Maybe not. You might be from Canada, but you're American. Okay, so they're all called Franks. Okay. All right. So Pope Urban. Pope Urban responds to the request, and he gives a rousing speech. He gives this rousing speech in Clermont, France. Okay, in 1095, which calls upon the Christians to enter upon the road to the Holy Sepulchre, to wrest the land, meaning to wrestle the land from the wicked race and subject it to yourselves. Urban's speech would help launch the first of several crusades. So he basically says, these barbarians, these Muslims that have controlled this area, it's time for Christendom to come up and push back this wicked race and take back over the Holy Land. What's fascinating about this is that at this time, as I said earlier, Europe is not a civilized place. Actually, the Muslim world at this time, much more civilized than the Europeans. But again, Pope Urban being the head of the Catholic Church and having the ear of the French king, the Holy Roman Emperor, and having this influence, the peasants could read. Whatever the Pope said had to be true, and so they said, yeah, it's a good idea. At the same time, remember, what's the condition in Europe for, let's say, the average person during the Middle Ages or the Dark Ages? It's horrible. Like, the lifespan is, if you reach 35, that'd be an old person, okay? I'm almost 40 years old. I would be considered an old man in the Middle Ages because most people are dying of disease or famine. If you are not a noble, if you are not someone who owns land, your existence is horrible. But even if you come from a noble family, in a noble family, there's only one person that gets the goods. Does anybody know who that person is?
Oldest son.
The oldest son. It's called primogenitor. So let's say I'm in a family, large family. I have 4 brothers. Okay, I'm one of 2 that's a twin. Okay, we're the last. So there's my oldest brother. He'd get everything. The second brother would probably go to the church. Okay, the second brother becomes a monk or works in the Catholic Church. He might work his way up from being a monk to a priest or to a bishop or something, depending on how wealthy my family is. He might go pretty high up. So the second brother's probably okay. From the third brother down, it's like, sorry, good luck, you get nothing. Okay? So what do? I become a knight, I become a soldier, and I become a soldier of fortune. I'm looking to make my own. So I've got to go search for treasure. I've got to go fight for glory. I've got to go get lands somewhere else because all my lands went to Robert, my oldest brother. Okay? So that's where a lot of these crusaders start to come from, are dark age or middle age, meaning time period, males that have no real wealth to speak of.
And nothing to lose.
And nothing to lose. And so they're like, hey, you're telling me I can go to the Crusades and find glory and maybe land and, do it for Christ, but really it's about me. I'm looking, because I got nothing back at the house, okay? That's the whole idea. So it does gin up a lot of support because there's nothing really left at home. All right. So, reasons for the Crusades. All right. The Pope had hoped to unite the Eastern Mediterranean and divided Christian faith under the banner of the Latin Church. You got to understand there was the Great Schism. Okay? Does anybody know what the Great Schism is? What's the Great Schism?
Isn't it when I don't know. It's I know it's something like Western Europe splits from Eastern.
Yes, but it's along the church's line. Okay, so if I say the Christian church and I say the European Christian church, you think of what?
Protestant versus Catholic.
There's Protestant versus Catholic. So Protestant, you think of America and you think of the Reformation. In Europe, you think of Catholic. Okay, so Catholic being based in Rome, the Catholic Church, the Pope, and all that. But there's also what's called the Eastern Orthodox Church. The Eastern Orthodox Church is based in Constantinople, or is tied back to the Byzantine Empire. There's still an Eastern Orthodox Church. Many of the Slavic countries in our world, Russia and the Baltic countries, they are Slavic and they are Eastern European and they are Orthodox. Okay, they are Eastern Orthodox. So the church splits between Western Roman Empire and Eastern Roman Empire because they have a difference in their interpretation. But really, it's about control of the Christian faith. And so there's these two different groups. The Orthodox, Greek Orthodox, that in fact, that's what they speak, is Greek. The Roman Catholic Church is based in Latin. So Pope Urban sees this as an opportunity for the Latin Church based in Rome to come together with the Eastern Orthodox Church and say, let's get all of Christendom under one banner. At this point in time, there is no Protestant church. This is way before Martin Luther. Okay? If there is church, there are only two. There is Eastern Orthodox and there is Catholic. Okay? There's no Protestant. So he sees this as an opportunity for the Roman Catholic Church to assert its dominance over the Eastern Orthodox Church and for there to be one Latin church under Rome. Okay? So the Italian city-states with their large, they hoped that there would be commercial gains also, and they supported. So these different fiefdoms, back then there was no Italy. Okay? There were all these city-states. Okay, and then if you, not only in Italy, but if you go into the Holy Roman Empire, the Holy Roman Empire, people think it's this large, strong, under Charlemagne or subsequent emperors, that it's this one strong kingdom. Actually, it's broken into many different Germanic and Frankish small fiefdoms. Okay, so you have Bavaria and the Prussians and all of these, the Hohenzollerns, all these different kingdoms, just like these different kingdoms, and they all sought glory and power and influence. And they thought, well, if we can do this thing for the Crusades, for the Pope, he wields a lot of influence over all of these states, and maybe we can kind of gain some commercial influence and trade influence in the East and the Middle East. Because remember, nobody's gone outside yet. You don't have Christopher Columbus yet. This is 400 years before Christopher Columbus. Okay? So everything that we know about trade goes through the Silk Road, through the Middle East to Asia. There's nothing outside of the Mediterranean. Okay, so gains over here in the Holy Land and in the Muslim world seem to be very profitable. Okay, so not all of the reasons for doing this yet.
I know it's a little behind. Could you explain the Great Schism?
Yes. So the Great Schism basically was when the Roman Church, split between when there was the creation of Constantinople and the church was moved from Rome to Constantinople when Constantine created a new capital. Okay, there was a Greek influence on the church. So from the time of Constantinople and the beginning of the Byzantine era of the Roman Church, or the Roman Empire. So you have Rome, and Constantine becomes Christian, and then he moves it to Constantinople and creates a new capital. There's this new influence over here in the eastern part of the empire. That influence is influenced by the Greeks and the Greek history and the Hellenistic world more so than you had in Rome. Rome was very traditional, it was very Latin. So the two worlds start to separate. Okay, and then after Constantine, you have many, and this is a completely different course, but you have many different emperors. Okay, and at one point in time, you had two emperors. You had one in the east and one in the west because Rome was starting to fall apart. Well, the Roman leader in the east, or the Constantinople leader, the Eastern Empire, it survives. It's under Justinian, and the Rome by this time starts to decay and was attacked by the Goths and the Visigoths and the Germanic tribes. So as Rome wanes and dies, what's left is this Eastern Church, and this Eastern Church is much more Greek. And so it's not like just one thing happened, we just don't agree. It's more of a growing apart and this becoming more of an Asian influence and its own empire, and the old Roman Empire dying. But then the old Roman Empire dies, the medieval time happens, and they really buy into Catholicism. So when all of the authority goes away from Rome, what's left is the church. Even though the Rome is sacked, and it's the Dark Ages. These tribes, these Germanic tribes, become converted to Christianity, and it's a Roman Catholic Christianity that they are converted to. So even though they go into a Dark Ages, there's kind of a rebirth in the control of the Roman Catholic Church, even though Rome no longer has political power, and the very old, ancient kind of antiquities type of Byzantine Empire. Think of the Byzantine Empire as an old Roman Empire. So you have a Dark Ages, but not Greek in nature, or not Roman Europe. It's not Roman, it's Catholic, and an old Greek empire. And that's what kind of separated the two. They grew apart. And when they try to come back together, they said, we don't believe the same things you do. If you go to an Eastern Orthodox church now, they are much more, when we say Orthodox, they are much more into the not traditions. They are very traditional. They're much more mystical in nature. Okay, so as much as you hear in the Roman Catholic Church that you have saints and cross and indulgences and pieces that are very this is the holy water, the tears of Christ, things like that. Yeah, they had that in the Roman Catholic Church, but in the Eastern Orthodox Church, they had even more over the top religious relics and things like that. They were more mystical in nature, okay, and very Greek in nature. So that was the Great Schism.
Okay. So pretty much they just had one church and they switched in the culture, changed how they viewed.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And created two churches in a sense.
Okay.
So it's kind of like Baptists and Methodists. Okay, so here in South Georgia, you're either Baptist, Methodist, maybe Presbyterian, but the two biggest are probably Baptist and Methodist. Okay, they're both Christian. I mean, if you get down to the bottom of it, they both say, Jesus Christ. It's great. Same thing with the Roman Catholic and the Eastern Orthodox. They're going to get down to it. They're going to say 12 apostles. There were 12. Jesus is the man. Son of God. The tenements, the basic are the same, but the expression of the religion differs. Okay? So, the difference in baptism and Baptist church and say a holiness church, when they say no dancing, yes dancing, no instruments, yes instruments, but when you get down to it, they all believe in Jesus Christ. Okay, so it is two churches, but it's just more of how you express your church. Okay. Good question, though. All right. So the Byzantine Empire was in severe decline. Okay, could no longer buffer itself from the Muslim world. The Muslims were continuing to press on the Byzantines. They could not hold their own ground, and they were also attacking the Catholic West, not directly to the Holy Roman Empire, but almost all of Spain was under Muslim control in the early Middle Ages. Okay, you had Castile in one other province. Nice.
In Spain?
Huh?
In Spain?
Yes.
Cordoba.
Yes. There's one other. There's three. There's the Basque too. But there are three main little pieces of Spain at the top that held on. The rest of it was dominated by the Muslims. But then slowly, as the Catholic Church and Europe awakens from this Middle Ages, they start to push the Muslims out of Spain, and they also look to push the Muslims back out of the Holy Land. So, but prior to that, Christendom is under attack kind of from the south through Spain and directly toward the Byzantine Empire. And it never bothered anybody up to this point. But when the Muslim world became kind of up in arms and in civil war, when the Christians couldn't get to Jerusalem, they said, wait a second, this is different. We've got to do something about this. Jerusalem is the most important place to us because that's where Christ was crucified and his ministry and everything. We need to get control of this. And so they decided we need to go over there and just take control. So, a new concept of war. So Augustine was a great theologian. Okay, Augustine's just war theory. He said that war waged under the auspices of the state were not just. If you're just doing war to get land, that's not a good thing. But if you were doing this for just reasons, meaning the defense of life and property, and if you conducted restraint within regard to the enemy and non-combatants and prisoners, that was okay. So he said, it's okay to do it for the church. So I guess if you consider that state would be okay. But if it's in the greater good, it's okay. It's a just thing. The idea of just war doesn't make sense. Okay? But Augustinian said there's an idea here. If I am fighting for my own protection or protection of my family or protection of the way of life, then you're not going to burn. The downside to war was if you killed someone, kind of in one of those big 10, the 10 Commandments, thou shalt not murder, right? Well, he said, but is it really murder if you're defending your life or your property? Should you be murdered just because someone else is willing to do this? And as long as you show restraint, you're not going in and killing people and raping and pillaging and doing horrible things. You're just doing what you need to do to keep the bad guys out. That's okay. So, and Augustinian is way before the Crusades. Okay. Pope Urban decides, hey, this is good. I can take Augustinian's just war theory and say it is just that the church wants to free the Holy Land. Because these Muslims, there are Christians who live in the Holy Land and Jews, and they are mistreated. So, at the behest of the Pope, and under the operational controls of kings, because the Pope really didn't have an army, but the kings did, it was a defense of faith. Okay? Here's the problem. There was no restraint in regard to the infidel. So Augustine would have said, you don't kill people just to kill people. They're trying to kill you, okay. But just because you walk in and I've taken control of the room and I go, wait a second, you're a Muslim, well, I'm going to kill you, that's not a just war. You can't just kill people just to kill them, okay? So the change was justified based on a biblical account of the conquest of Canaan. If anybody knows about the conquest of Canaan, the Canaan is what? What was Canaan called? Promised land. Who was it promised to?
Jews.
By?
God.
Abraham.
Yeah. It was promised to Abraham originally. Then the Jews are taken or willingly go into Egypt. Okay? And they overstay their welcome. They go from being a protected class to a slavery class. And Moses comes up and says, let my people go. You've heard the story. Okay? And Moses finally lets his people go. The Pharaoh finally lets Moses' people go eventually. And he gets them right up to the promised land, and then Moses dies. Right? God takes Moses up to heaven, but before he does that, he says to Joshua, you are going to be the one that leads them into the promised land. If you have read the accounts of Joshua going into the promised land, what happens to the people who live in the promised land currently before Joshua takes them in? Does anybody know? Okay, if you go read in the Bible, you will find out that they pretty much wipe out everybody they come in contact with. Ai. And many other groups that are there. It's not like, okay, I'm going to come in and just kill the males. We'll take the females and the flocks and everything else, and we'll just bring them into, the Jewish families, and we'll take care of them. No, it's nothing. Wipe it all out. Total war. Okay? Because at the time, it was said they were unclean, so you take nothing from it. Not a single person. All right? So the Pope says, the reason God did that was because they were non-Jews. So because they were non-Jews, they were not clean, they were infidels, they were bad people. So the Christians should go over there and wipe out the non-Christian, which is kind of counter to what Jesus was saying, but okay. That was the whole change in the mentality of war, was that it says in the Bible you can wipe out bad people. Okay, well, that goes back to the Old Testament. The New Testament didn't really say that, so I'm not sure how I made that jihad, but that was the idea. New concept of war. Okay? So, Pope Urban traveled many cities for 9 months, preaching about the Crusades and offering extraordinary inducements to include plenary indulgences remitted for all punishments due to sin for those who died in the Crusades. Any idea what plenary indulgences mean? Okay. I know what sin means. What's sin mean?
Doing something wrong.
Like doing something wrong, right? Doing bad stuff, right? Whatever you're not supposed to do, right? So, here's what Pope said. Pope Urban went around saying, here's the deal I'll give you. If you go on the Crusades, any sin that you've committed up until this point that you're not forgiven for, wipe clean. And if you do sins on the way, they'll be wiped clean. I'm going to give you an indulgence. I'm the Pope. I am the vestige of Christ. I'm the leader of the church. I am going to give you this piece of paper that says, basically, do what you want, but your soul is safe. And he gave this to a bunch of people who had nothing to lose. Remember, we talked about that. And everything to gain. Sounds like a blank check to me. Yeah? Okay? The serfs were allowed to leave their land. Anybody know what a serf is?
It's kind of like a slave.
Kind of like a slave, exactly. A serf is a slave that's attached to the land. So if I buy a piece of land and there are 5 serfs on it, I buy the land and I buy you. Okay? If you were a serf, you're not allowed to leave the land. All right? Well, but if you went on the Crusades, you could become your own man. They're like, yeah, I don't want to work for this guy just because he's the biggest in the room. I want to be my own man and have my own. I want to become a knight and I want to have my own wealth. I'm going to go on this crusades. Citizens were exempt from taxes. The Roman Catholic Church had taxes that they collected. Okay? Debtors were given moratorium on their interest. Think of it as a credit card. But if you go fight in the Crusades, interest-free until you get back. Well, if I go over there and fight, maybe I make a little bit of money, I might come back, pay off my credit card, and it won't keep gaining interest. Okay? Prisoners were freed and death sentences were commuted. So basically, they said, anybody who wants to go, we'll take you. So, not all of these people were good people. Good Christian faring people. A lot of these people had lots of baggage. Okay? So the variety of motivations resulted in a varied assembly. What I mean by that is, you didn't have just a congregation of cross-toting, pious people. You had everything from a death row inmate to a devout Christian in this mix, and everything in between. Okay? You had men that were tired of hopeless poverty. You had some that were just seeking adventure. And it's like, I have seen the same piece of land my entire life. My daddy worked it, my daddy's daddy worked it, and they had nothing. I want to leave this for anything. So you had adventure seekers. You had merchants looking for new markets. You had lords whose enlisting serfs had left them laborless. So you had people who went, and if the king went or the lord went, and you were left behind, and maybe the lord was killed, then you were left with nothing. So why don't you go as well? Okay? And then you had sincerely religious people wanting to rescue the land of Christ. So there's a whole mix of people. Okay? From the most pious, God-fearing people to the most advantageous, try to take advantage of the situation as best as possible. Okay? So, the first crusade. Okay? The word crusade comes from the Spanish word crusade, which means marked with the cross. So, this is what the typical crusader would look like in the first crusade. Okay? They wore a red cross on their chest that symbolized their purpose. Now, they didn't all wear that. Only the ones that had the means to wear that would wear that. But that's what ended up typifying the Crusades, was the knight with the red cross on the chest. Okay? Let's see. First Crusade. Urban had appointed August 1096 as the time for departure. But many of the more impatient peasants were among the first recruits, and they could not wait, so they took off. They were led by personalities such as Peter the Hermit and Walter the Penniless. Notice the names, okay? It's not, Richard the Lionhearted or anything. And they quickly set it out in 3 groups and quickly dissolved into disorder, hunger, and ill discipline. So basically you had these guys that said, so let's just go ahead and go. Okay, and they let off, and of course, without money, without discipline, without means, without organization, it quickly had a problem. Okay, they were all but annihilated by the force of the Turks in Nicaea. So the first one, not so effective. Okay, you have Alexis Comnenus, the Emperor of the East, receives Peter the Hermit in Constantinople in 1096. Okay, so he says, it's great that you're here, but what ends up happening, he says, you're great that you're here, and then when they start to take off, Alexis kind of turns his back and says, good luck with that, and it doesn't give them the support that they need. And this ends up being a bad thing. Okay? So, within the First Crusade, the more organized crusaders, under the leadership, the divided leadership of various feudal lords, moved various routes to Constantinople. There, Emperor Alexis gave them provisions and bribes in exchange for a pledge of support. Alexis was somewhat afraid of the Crusades because they had designs on Constantinople as well as Jerusalem. So think of it this way. You have the wild and ranctious pre-party of these groups that are ill-disciplined and they get themselves in trouble. And then afterwards you have the professionals. You have the knights. You have these lords. And these lords are people who own serfs and people underneath them, so they understand rank and order and being able to keep control of a large crowd. Why is Alexis afraid? Because he doesn't really have a good standing army anyway. I mean, they could sack Constantinople just as easy as they could sack Jerusalem. Okay? So the main leaders here is Duke Godfrey. He was the most brave. He was pious. He was competent. And he was a fanatical leader of the first Crusaders. He's one of those leaders who went for all the right reasons. He had plenty of money back home. He truly went because he felt impassioned by his faith to free the Holy Land. Okay? But he also knew what he was doing. He was a competent ruler. Okay? The First Crusades met even more divided Muslim forces and won victories in Nicaea and Antioch by June 7th of 99. After a 3-year campaign, 12,000 of the original 30,000 Crusaders reached Jerusalem. Okay? So because the Muslims were so in disarray, they were in such civil war and civil strife amongst themselves, everybody the Crusaders ran into, they just wiped out. No problem. Now, many of them died along the way from starvation, from disease, from poor conditions, from battle. So you start with 30,000, you're down to 12,000. That's not a very good ratio. But even though they're losing lots of people, they're still winning. Okay? On July 15th, the Crusaders went over the walls and unleashed unbridled carnage. And when I mean unbridled carnage, meaning they killed everybody. Blood reportedly ran knee-deep. 70,000 Muslims were slaughtered. Jews were herded into synagogues and burned alive. They did not spare the women. They did not spare the children. They killed everybody. So when they talk about the Crusades and they say, even the Christians in the Crusades, we talk today about Muslims and terrorism and killing people for their religion, people today will hearken back to this time of Christianity and say, well, see, they did it back then too. Yes, they did. What I would say is the difference is that at this point in time, where did these people come from? I told you earlier, they came from where?
Roman Church.
Well, the Roman Catholic Church told them to come. Where in the world?
Europe.
Europe. During what age?
Dark Ages.
Dark Ages. What did we say about the civil understanding, the construct of society in the Dark Ages? Was it a civil place to live? No. The biggest person ran things, right? It was kill or be killed. It was dog eat dog, however you want to say it. It was not a civil society, okay? So, I don't agree with, this is just me, I don't agree with likening the Crusades to any form of religious terrorism, whether it's Islamic or any other of today. Why? Because no one today lives in a situation of not understanding social norms. Even in third world countries, there are still social norms. There are cell phones in third world countries. Okay? There weren't cell phones back then. Man's understanding of who he was or she was compared to God or anything else was minute. His understanding of the world was minute. Okay? Man's understanding today, even in the poorest areas of the world, is infinite compared to the understanding of the medieval brain. Okay? Nobody today thinks that the sun comes up because it's a god. And they know that's a star, and we live in a solar system. Okay, so you can't equate the two. Okay, but at the time, this is a very dark blot on the Christian faith, because it still boggles the mind how you can be a Christian and understand Christ and His love and say, but it's okay to create knee-deep puddles of blood. I just don't get it. So, it was pretty gruesome. It was not pretty. Okay? And they also killed the Jews. Don't understand that, but they said basically if you're not a Christian, you're not surviving this. Okay? So, the administration of Jerusalem was problematic. It has been ever since. Okay, and we're going to talk about that later on in this lecture. Okay, but eventually a kingdom was parceled out into practically independent fiefdoms and barons that assumed ownership and reduced the former owners into serf conditions. The kingdoms were further weakened by ceding of several ports to Italian city-states in exchange for naval support. So you get the Crusades, the Crusaders, they come down, they take over the land, they get there and like, great, we have all this land, but we need boats and we need support. You've heard of the Medici, okay? You've heard of Venice and the boats and the famous Italian traders. Well, they kind of gave control of the port city to these Italian traders, which sounds like a good thing because you get the boats, but it's at a cost. I don't control it. They really control it because I control the land, but they control the boats, and that's how we get stuff from Europe, and that's how we send stuff back to Europe to sell it. So are they really controlling it, or are the Italians? Okay. The native Christian population came back the native Christian population came back to the era of the golden age of the Muslim era. So what happened during the golden age of Muslim rule? How were Christians treated during the golden age? Meaning when you had the Umayyadan or the Abbasians, the stable Muslim empires. Were they treated fairly? During the stable Islamic empires, or were they treated unfairly? Remember, they were people of the book, so they were treated fairly. Okay, so stay with me here. Basically, because the Christians were in control now, Christians flooded in because they felt like this is a safe place to be. It's in Christian hands, and so the population grew back up to the normal Christian norms during the height of the Muslim rule of the Golden Age when things were good. Okay. So Godfrey, as we talked about, served as the first ruler of Jerusalem. Knights. Okay, we talked about knights were established. These are people to protect. Okay, the establishment of new orders of military monks. They protected the people going back and forth from Europe to the Holy Land. You have the Knights Hospitaller is where we get the word hospital, okay, of St. John's. And you have the Knights Templar. They began protecting pilgrims going back and forth. And they also would attack Muslim strongholds. Okay, so the Knights Templar, okay. Most of that stuff is that you see about them, unless I'm misinformed, is not true. Okay? The truth about them is that yes, they were a secret order. Yes, they were created to protect pilgrims. Yes, they created lots of wealth and became wealthy. Okay? And no, I don't believe that it was associated with finding the head of John the Baptist or finding the Holy Grail. I don't believe any of that. I believe they became very powerful. I believe they became very wealthy. And the reason, anybody know why we have Friday the 13th? Friday the 13th is what? What do you know about Friday the 13th? It's what? It's bad. It's unlucky, right? That's basically what most people know. Friday the 13th is bad. Okay? It's bad because on Friday the 13th, and I don't remember the year, so because that's not the course we're doing tonight. But Friday the 13th, the Knights Templar was attacked. The whole organization. And at this point in time, they basically had so much power and control over Europe that they were the power broker of Europe. Okay, this is many hundreds of years after this. Okay, but they were attacked on Friday the 13th, and most of them were killed. Okay, so it's very unlucky for the Knights Templar. All right, so but the whole idea of the Knights Templar, they found something on, that could be true. It could be a connection to the Masons and all that stuff. But what history knows and what has been reported out is that really and truly they were knights that protected people, and in protecting people they became wealthy. In becoming wealthy, they ended up creating banks and creating even more wealth, and they lent more money to the power brokers of Europe, and they became so powerful that the King of France, who was bankrupt at the time, said, you know what, I'm bankrupt, but you know what I can do? If I can make the Knights Templar look like the bad guys, I can seize all their property, and I become rich, and we killed them all. Friday the 13th. That's how he handled it. So, as a tangent here, but they were created originally to protect the pilgrims, people going back and forth to the Holy Land from Christendom, from Europe, to the newly acquired Jerusalem. Okay? And they were protected going back and forth. Both orders would come to play prominent roles in the battles of the Crusades and earn great reputations as warriors. So they were kind of hired warriors. Okay, so Muslim counterattack. So all good things must come to an end. Not to say the Crusades were a good thing, but it had to come to an end. Most of the Crusades or Crusaders returned to Europe after freeing Jerusalem. So most of the people who came down here originally who survived said, this is great, I've made a little bit of money, I'm going back home. Okay? So a very small number were left to control this area. Think of it as a sea of piranha surrounding a small group or a small school of fish. Okay? You have Muslims everywhere. The population is full of Muslims. And you have a very small group of Christians holding this territory. It's not conducive for holding or staying in power if they ever decide to get their junk together, meaning the Muslims decide, it'd be better to fight just them instead of us. If we stop fighting each other, we might be able to push them back. So, there was a manpower shortage here. Muslim refugees retreated to Baghdad, Baghdad being back in the Arabian Peninsula, okay? And they demanded a force to retake Jerusalem. So they started to pull together. In 1144, Muslims under Zangi retook the Christian easternmost outpost of Edessa. So this is the first to go, is the country of Edessa, or the Countess of Edessa. Okay? And this would develop the need for a second crusade. So when they lost a territory, they said, you know what? We need to go back and double down and come back and do a second crusade. Here's the thing about more crusades. St. Bernard appealed to Pope Ignace II for a call for another crusade, but Ignace begged Bernard to undertake the task for himself. And Bernard persuaded King Louis the VII of France and Emperor Conrad III of Germany, Emperor Conrad III being the Holy Roman Emperor, okay, to accept the crusade. On Easter of 1147, the Germans set out and the French followed at Pentecost. So think of Easter week. They are ready. Here they come, Conrad and Louis VII. Okay? So this time the Muslims were ready. At Doriaeum, the Germans were defeated so badly that barely 1 in 10 Christians survived. Okay? So the Germans are wiped out. In Attilia, nearly every Frenchman was slaughtered. Eventually, the Crusaders joined forces and laid siege to Damascus, but were soundly defeated. So, what you're going to find is that the First Crusade was the only successful crusade. And there were many after. But every one of them after the first has very little success. So the second one is pretty well wiped out from the beginning. News of the defeat of the Second Crusade shocks Europe. Okay? Shocks Europe. No one thought that this could happen. Why? Well, the First Crusade went so well. And because the First Crusade went so well, they thought, well, the First Crusade went so well, we must be blessed by God and nobody can take us on. Well, not so much. Christians wondered how God could allow them to be humiliated by the infidel. Bernard said, well, it must be because of sin. Enthusiasm for another crusade waned rapidly. Everybody wants to be part of a winner. Not everybody wants to be part of a loser. So after losing the second, that's when people started saying, I don't know if I want to join up for this whole crusade thing. While the Latin Kingdom of Jerusalem continued to be torn by internal strife, its Muslims' enemy started to move toward unity. So the countries or the fiefdoms, the papal states, the crusading states that are left are slowly becoming weaker and weaker, and the Muslim enemies are finally saying, you know what, let's stop fighting each other and let's fight these Christians. So it is not a pretty thing. It's getting pretty hairy. And then you have Saladin. Saladin is the leader who eventually wipes out the Crusaders and takes back the land for the Muslims. Okay? Saladin brought Egypt and the Muslim Syria under one rule, so he takes over Egypt and he takes over Syria, and now he is the big honcho. He is the leader in 1185. He signs a 4-year truce with the Latin Kingdom, but the Christians violate it by attacking the Muslim caravans and capture Saladin's sister. Big mistake. Big mistake. Okay? He declares holy war, jihad, versus the Christians, and he captures Jerusalem in 1187. His terms were much more generous than those of the Christians and Crusaders in 1099. Saladin is one of the few Crusade personalities that generally described favorably both by the Eastern and the Western. So when he took back Jerusalem, he did not go in and kill every Christian he could find. He made him leave. He was very honorable in his winning. And that's why he is seen favorably. Not only by Muslims, but also by Christians, because he didn't do the same thing. So then there's a third crusade. The Christians were still able to retain Tyre and Antioch and Tripoli. The Italian fleet still controlled the Mediterranean, and so you had William, Archbishop of Tyre, return to Europe, and he called for another crusade. Frederick Barbarossa of Germany set out with his army in 1189, but had little success. Okay, March of the Crusades is this a picture of it. The Third Crusade was not successful. Okay, although there are some standoffs, so it's much more successful than the Second Crusade. This is where you get Richard the Lionhearted. He took up the cause. And so did Philip Augustus, of the French king. Okay, so the Christians capture Acre. Okay, but Philip Augustus returns to France, leaving Richard alone in charge of the Third Crusade. Basically, the Third Crusade is a standoff. Still, Richard would face division as the German troops returned to Germany and the French troops repeatedly disobeyed his orders. Okay, he is able to still maintain control of the area, and Saladin actually has a healthy respect for Richard the Lionhearted. So, if you were to say that was there any other crusade other than the first one that was successful, you could say the Third Crusade was successful because at least it was a standoff. It was not an abject failure. They were able to hold some territory and fight to stay in control. Richard and Saladin embarked on a unique campaign which blows and battles alternated with compliments and courtesans. Okay? The two executed enemy prisoners they held. Richard proposed his sister to marry Saladin's brother. Okay, so you have these two, they respect one another, and they also try to work out a deal. Maybe if I get my sister to marry your brother, we can stop fighting. They signed a peace treaty. Then they rejected it. Okay, Richard conferred a kingdom to his son. Conferred the knighthood of the son of the Muslim ambassador. Richard got sick, and Saladin sent him his own physician and some fruit. So, again, it's not like they're just bitter enemies. They have a healthy respect for one another. Okay? Again, in one battle, Saladin saw Richard dismounted, meaning knocked off his horse, and he sent him his own horse. So, there's a healthy respect between the two men. In the end, Richard and Saladin signed a peace treaty for 3 years in September 2nd of 1192. Richard would keep the coastal cities he had captured, which is Acre and to Jaffa. Okay. The Muslims and the Christians could pass freely into each other's territory, so with open borders going back and forth. The pilgrims would be protected to go to Jerusalem. So at this time, Jerusalem is controlled by the Muslims, but the Christians can come down through the three and come into Jerusalem and be fine. But Jerusalem would remain in Muslim hands. Okay, that was the agreement. So Richard, what do we know about Richard? He possessed superior brilliance, courage, and knowledge of the military art, but Saladin's moderation, patience, and justice carried the day. So think of Richard as the gallant medieval soldier, but Saladin is more of the savvy modern man. Okay? And what does Saladin understand? He understands he has more people. There's no reason for him to get into battles that will cause him loss of many of his soldiers. He understands he's got the upper hand and he can really wait Richard out. So he doesn't try to take him on directly all the time. He understands, I'll take him on when I need to. But in the end, I'm going to win because I have the upper hand. It's not about brute force. It's not about one rousing speech that's going to get us into this one big battle. Why waste or have the possibility of losing this big battle when I can just wait him out and fight him when I need to, knowing I'm going to win in the end? Okay? The relative unity and fidelity of the Muslims had once again triumphed over the Christian division and disloyalty. So again, once the Muslims kind of got on the same team, and remember the Christians are coming from Germany, they're coming from France, they're coming from England. They don't trust each other. I mean, they all believe in Jesus. They're all Christians. But they don't have this bond of we're all from the same place. They speak 3 different languages. They're here for lots of different reasons. So there's not like, well, we're in this together forever no matter what. But the Muslims, they had one thing that they believed in and they polarized behind or got behind. They all didn't like the Christian. They could all get on the same page. Well, the 3 groups that are coming for the Crusades, they all have their own agenda. And when you both play baseball, right? So if everybody's trying to just become the home run hitter or make all the plays, how good is that baseball team going to be? You have to play as a team. If you don't shift and get in position when a certain pull hitter's coming in up to bat, or the coach tells you to, if one guy says, I'm not doing it, coach, I'm going to stand over here, your lineup, your positioning out the door, and it can throw everything off. Okay? So the sense of team that the Muslims had paid off, and the nonsense of team, the non-team effect that the Christians had, ended up causing them to fail. So then you had the 4th Crusade. Acre was freed but Jerusalem was still in the Muslim hands. So Europe was under turmoil because of problems such as the renewed fighting between France and England. But the death of Saladin and the breakup of the empire brought new hope. So Saladin dies, and the European, even though they're not on the same page anymore, and France and England are at each other's throats, they say, well, look, the great Saladin's dead. So maybe we can go back and push the Muslims back again. Okay? In exchange for financial support, Venice extracted promises from the Crusaders that they would capture an important port of Zara and turn it over to her. So Venice, this is one of those Italian cities, decides that if you go and fight this and you give us Zara, we'll pay for it. Okay? Zara belonged to Hungary, and it was stiff competition for Venice's maritime trade. Pope Innocent III denounced the scheme, but to no avail. The Fourth Crusade would be marked by avarice. What's avarice? Part of avarice was the temptation to capture Constantinople, which had been derived of much profit from the Crusades. So seizing Constantinople would not only provide financial benefit, it would restore the Western Church. Avarice is greed. Okay? The Fourth Crusade was all about greed. Can we get money? Right, so what's the problem with sacking and seizing Constantinople? Who's in control of Constantinople?
Muslims?
Nope.
Isn't it the Eastern?
The Eastern Empire. The Byzantines are still there. These are Christians. Christians control it. But the Western Church, the Roman Church says, you know what? We can get some money if we just take off. And remember, the Byzantine Church has been around for over 1,000 years. They got lots of gold. They got lots of ornamental stuff. They've got a lot of wealth. They're not a very strong country or strong empire, but they do have a lot of wealth. Okay? So instead of going and fighting Jerusalem that's been captured and recaptured and burned and built back and burned again, why don't we just take Constantinople where all that gold is? So in 1204, the Crusaders capture and loot Constantinople. That is Christian on Christian crime right there. So the Byzantine Empire was divided among feudal dominions, each ruled by Latin nobles, meaning Westerners, not Byzantine or Easterners. Most Crusaders returned home, perhaps thinking that by securing Constantinople, they now had a stronger base against the Muslims. Only a handful continued on to Palestine and had no effect. So basically they went to Constantinople and then they turned around. They got their wealth, they turned around. The Byzantine Empire never recovered. And the Latins captured Constantinople and they served to prepare for the future capital of Turks 2 centuries later. So this was the end of the Eastern Empire, basically. It takes 200 more years for Constantinople to be officially taken over, but it's over. They have writings on the wall. The collapse of the Crusade. The scandal of the Fourth Crusade and the failure of the Third quenched the fire of Crusades, but several half-hearted attempts would continue until 1291. In 1291, the Muslims seized Acre, Tyre, Sidon, Haifa, and Beirut soon fell afterwards. Among the ineffective leaders were the Children's Crusade. This was an interesting one. So, during the Children's Crusade, you had this charismatic person, this charismatic man that said that the children were God was going to will it that the children would free and take over the Holy Land. So you had all of these children come and they set out toward the Holy Land, and then when they get into Muslim territory, they are sold into slavery because they're kids. They can't fight. They literally thought heavens would open and God would just say, "These are my children," and give them the land, and it would all be over with. It was a complete faith-based crusade that was obviously not going to work. Okay, because it was not. It was a farce. Okay, these kids that ended up in slavery. So the results of the Crusades. Jerusalem still in Muslim hands. Christian pilgrims became fewer and feared more than ever. Muslim power, once tolerant to religious diversity, were now intolerant. Just remember, before the Crusades, the Muslims really had no problem with the Christians. They were people of the book. The Crusades make it where the Christians and the Muslims are enemies. Efforts to bring the popes to bring peace and unity to Europe were thwarted by nationalistic ambitions, avarice, and internal dissension. Now, here's the thing. The popes would say, we all need to be together in Christ and have this one great nation of community and be all Christian together. But here's the thing. They wanted power and influence, and then they were trying to get the Germans and the French and the English and the Spanish and the Italians to all to get along. And all of them would say, this is great and all, but we're only going to do what's best for Italy or the Italian states. It wasn't Italy at this time. Or the Germanic states or France or England. So they would only go so far. There was still a very nationalistic bent toward these kingdoms, and they were only going to let the Pope tell them what to do so far. Okay? The influence of the Catholic Church and its position declined after this. So prior to the Crusades and into the Crusades, if the Pope said something, that was like it. You don't want to make the Pope mad. He'd excommunicate you, all kind of bad things. But after the Crusades, there's a couple things that start happening. Again, what happens right after the 1200s, leading into the 13 to 1400s? What happens in Europe? It's a big, important period of time. Renaissance, exactly. The Renaissance, the Renaissance is a direct correlation to the learning from what happened in the Crusades, and man starts to become enlightened. And the one thing they start to say is the Pope is a man. Now he's an important man. He's the head of the Catholic Church, but he's just a man. Out of the Renaissance, you have the Reformation. You have a new relationship between man and God, because all of a sudden I don't have to run everything through the Pope. So if I don't fear that the Pope is going to excommunicate me or that he may damn me to hell, kind of thing, well, his influence wanes. I don't fear the Pope as, God's chosen man who holds my soul in his... No, my soul is between God and myself. So that enlightenment change. So the Catholic Church, in its attempt to become the one Latin Church, ends up basically weakening itself because of the Crusades, not strengthening. So the opposite happens. Okay? So again, Muslim civilization become victorious over Christian civilizations in the area. Okay? Indigenous Eastern Christians are caught between the middle of the Crusades and the Muslims. Many who were outraged by the excesses of the Crusaders, or whom avoid the persecution of Muslim leaders, were saw as collaborators with the Crusaders, or convert to Islam. The fact that the Crusades ironically proved instrumental in making the Eastern Mediterranean predominantly Muslim. So think of it this way. Prior to the Crusades, much of the territory of Anatolia and along the coast were predominantly Christian in nature. More Christians than Muslims. But because of the Crusades, most of those territories are now predominantly Muslim. Even hundreds of years later. Okay? So the effect was not just territorial, it was not just historical, it actually changed the geopolitical and social structure of the area. There were some successes. Now, it didn't seem like it, but there were. Serfs had used the Crusades to leave their lands and found new opportunities. So, again, you break the cycle of the Middle Ages. The learning, the understanding, the opportunity, it does change things. The Turks captured Constantinople. It was delayed until 1453. Muslims, even though victorious, had themselves been weakened and fell more easily against Mongol attack. This is another section of history, but because of the efforts of the Crusades, the Byzantine Empire doesn't die until 1452 or 1453. So the Muslims are kept out of Constantinople and kept out of Europe because they become weak and they're attacked from their back end by the Asian Mongols, okay, and they're kept at bay. And trade and exploration were enhanced. So the Middle East becomes this kind of conduit back and forth where nobody has ultimate power and you go back and forth. So there are some positive things. Trade. Trade is a huge positive here. The Italian traders obviously benefited from the supply from the Crusades while they were going on, but they also saw an opportunity to expand their market and establish direct trade with the Muslim world. The trade was very lucrative. Great profits were brought into the Italian city-states, which provided the economic basis for the Italian Renaissance. Lorenzo de Medici was part of a family in Florence. You've heard of the de Medicis, and they are bankers to the Crusades and patrons of the Renaissance. Again, the wealth that's created and the learning that's created in art and history and science does or is born out of the Crusades. So Europe awakens because of the Crusades, because of the wealth that's transferred from the Middle Eastern area into Europe. It kind of starts as a Kickstarter. Think of it as a spark to the opening of man's mind and economies of scale in Europe. So Europe slowly grinds out of the Dark Ages into this age of Renaissance because of the horrible Crusades. So trade, okay, one of the most important things were spices. You had new things that were coming through from the Orient through the trade routes established during the Crusades. Damascus was a key center of industry and commerce and was a stopping point on the way for pilgrims on the way to Mecca. So you had, again, this trade that was sparked. And the trade that was created between Europe and the Far East through the Middle East created great wealth in Europe. So Europeans became exposed to new ideas as they traveled throughout the Mediterranean basin. They found the works of Aristotle. So this was a finding. Aristotle is one of the most profound writers of intellectual thought in the history of man. Islamic science and astronomy was shared with Europe. Okay? Arabic numerals were borrowed by Muslims from India. The math, basically. We have the math today because of the Arabic numerals that were given to us given to Western civilization during the trade that occurred before and after the Crusades. The technique of making paper was found by the Muslims and learned from China. Okay? While the Crusades may have largely been a military failed adventure, okay, they had encouraged the integration of Western Europe into a larger economy of the Western Hemisphere. Think of it this way. As soon as the Crusades are over, Europe starts to grow, and during the 14th and 15th century, Europe turns to the New World and then finds a way to find even more wealth and power in the New World. So it creates the situation where Europe wants to go beyond Europe. And they know they can't go toward the Middle East because they don't want to do that again. Okay? They did that. They got the t-shirt. Didn't work out very well. But it worked out well enough that they said, you know what? There must be something that way. And we have the means, the boats, the money, and we're not worried that we're going to fall off the face of the earth because we think there's something bigger to this world. We're going to go look. And that's what leads to the finding of the New World, which brings lots of money into Europe. Okay? And then Europe becomes what we know it is today. The foundation of the Western civilization, and then the foundation of America, and everything else that's happened in Western civilization really is linked back to the Crusades, because the end of Rome, Europe is a backwards, just non-society, and then it emerges from this crazy time of attacking the Muslims and then trading and learning and growth to this new this new age of growth and learning. So there's the Reconquista. The Christians have a better success in wresting Sicily from Spain, from the Muslims. So basically, when they stop fighting the Muslims all the way over here, they say, you know what we should do? We should fight the Muslims that are here, and we should fight the Muslims that are in Spain because they're on our territory. It's a whole lot easier to fight them on our side because they're far away from their side. Okay, and so they're able to push the Muslims out of lower Italy and Sicily early on. That was pretty easy. And it takes a little bit longer in Spain, but they finally end up in the 1400s pushing them out of Spain, the last area of Granada in Spain. Okay, as you can see here. So you see that they begin from 711 to 1030 AD, the part that's Muslim, the part that's Christian. This is the part that's Christian right here. That's it. Catalonia, Aragon, Navarre, Castile. Okay, this is it. All of this, Andalusia. Okay, and there's now the city of Andalusia here. There's also a city in Alabama named Andalusia. Is where my wife is from, so that's kind of funny. But this is all Muslim control. Okay, and then they slowly by the 14th century push the Muslims out. Okay. Granada is the last vestige of, by 1490, you see the end of the Muslims there. By 1150, the Christians had recaptured Lisbon and control over half the peninsula. The success lured reinforcements from France and England, and a new round of campaigns in the 1300s, which brought all of under control except for Granada, okay, into Christians' hand. In 1492, the Christian forces conquered Granada and the Reconquista. What's significant about 1492? It's a wonderful little rhyme. It works every time. So basically, on the heels of pushing the Muslims out, and we are awesome, let's just send them out. Again, it's the idea of what can we not do? What can we not achieve? We've been able to have these successes, and we've learned so much. And this guy, Christopher Columbus, says that there's something over there. It's actually looking for trade. It's not a new world. He just says, if I go that way, I can get to the Orient faster than going all the way across the Mediterranean through Muslim lands to get to the Orient. I can go that way, and we can skip the Orient altogether, and we can skip the Muslims altogether, was the whole idea, okay? Which we know he ran into a continent, so wasn't the case. Okay? The immediate impact of the Reconquista after the success, devout Christian rulers of Spain and Portugal were eager to dominate Islamic states in North Africa and convert them to Christians. The desire spread to Christianity to more motives to expand the European exploration. So again, with the success of taking Spain back, Europe decides we need to go elsewhere. Now, they don't want to go back to the Holy Land because that's established. They know that it's fortified. They don't want to go back there. But they do think that there's this great idea to push into Africa and to go out into the great expanse of the blue and see what's out there. Maybe we can get to the Orient and not have to go through the Holy Land, go around. Okay, so it leads to the expansion of Europe across the world. Okay, so for next week, let me show you this content. All right. So in week 6, we're going to talk about modern Middle East. Modern Middle East up to World War I. Okay, World War I is kind of the delineation point. Okay, so I want you to, in your books, of course, work on your essay. Okay, let me show you where that is. Again. The essay is here in part 4, and you can turn it in here. It says essay 1, okay? Replaces week 4 test. Essay help, that's just kind of the original help that I was going to do. I gave that out to you. This was going to be the essay for the test, okay? But instead of using it in the test, we're just going to write it as a paper. So don't worry about this first one. really worry about this second one here, and you turn it in there. So you should click there and be able to turn in your assignment there. Okay. So we're going to look at part. In part 2, you're going to look at part 3, 19th century. You're going to look at area of revolution, Napoleon, Muhammad II, Mehmet Khalid. So I'd like you to try to skim over chapters 23, 25, 27, and 31. Okay. So, 23, 25, 27, 31. Those are the chapters in review. And any questions?
Is that whole PowerPoint you just did, is that on week 5?
Yes. So, to find that, nice PowerPoint, week 5, right there. Crusades. Okay? That's it.
Oh. I'm taking your Asia Pacific class too.
Yeah, you're going to get a note on that tonight, or no, tomorrow. Because we got to get back on track on that class too.
I was going to say, because I turned in my chapter 1 summary, and I went to turn in my chapter